Hello and welcome to another edition of Truth and Rhythm. This is a show that gets deep in the pocket with contemporary music's foremost masters of the groove. I'm your host, Scott Dr. Goldfine, musicologist and author of Everything is on the One, the First Guide to Funk. If you don't have your copy, get on over to Amazon and pick one up. You'll be so glad you did. Also makes a great gift. Whether you're watching or listening, as always, I thank you for your continued interest and support. Speaking of which, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe. Subscribe to the Funk and Stuff channel on YouTube. That's where Truth and Rhythm lives and breathes. And also special related products like Truth and Rhythm Quick Takes, which are excerpts of the longer shows. So subscribe, tell a friend, tell family. This episode features an icon of funk, soul, and hip-hop radio. On-air personality extraordinaire J.J. Johnson. First taking to the airwaves as a teenager in January 1968 at WABQ Cleveland, he then moved on to KYOK Houston the following year. In 1971, Johnson was hired at WGRT Chicago, and later that year moved to San Francisco for a position with KFRC. After being promoted to program director at KFRC in 1973, in 1974, he was then hired by 1580 KDAY, KDAY in Los Angeles. It was there, with LA's most prominent and progressive R&B black urban radio station, that he really built his legend, spending the better part of 17 years with that station. For some 2 decades, KDAY's ear-to-the-street music rotation defined Southern California R&B, funk, and rap sensibilities. Its character and assortment of characters reflected the community and its mindset. In the 1970s, if you were within its signal footprint and were into funk, you kept your dial glued to 1580, and same goes for the 1980s with rap, if that was your thing. Johnson also worked at other leading LA area stations, including KMPC, KJLH, and KACE. His extensive credits as an announcer also include the radio special, The Music of Black America, the Budweiser Concert Hour, 30 years with Motown, including the Emmy-winning Motown 25. He was also the segment announcer for Real TV with Ahmad Rashad, and appeared as a ringside sports announcer in the movie Penitentiary III. During his illustrious career, Johnson has had the pleasure of meeting various celebrities and icons in entertainment. For example, Marvin Gaye, Barry White, Marilyn McCoo, Albert King, Kool and the Gang, George Clinton, Patti LaBelle, Al Green, Al Jarreau, Babyface, the Jackson 5, and dozens more. In 2017, his book, Aircheck, Life in Music Radio, was made a part of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's permanent library and archives collection. Truth and Rhythm speaks to Johnson about his rise within the radio industry, how the business has changed over time, his remarkable run at the equally remarkable KDAY, memories forever etched into his mind, and what's next for him. Keep that dial where it is for a fantastic journey through the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, when radio ruled the music world, courtesy of the great J.J. Johnson. Hey, I'm so pleased to welcome to the Truth and Rhythm Mothership renowned radio personality J.J. Johnson, who among his many accomplishments was a key figure for Los Angeles's legendary funk R&B and eventually rap AM station 1580 KDAY, KDAY. JJ, how are you today?
I'm just fine, thank you. How are you, Scott?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm so glad you could join me.
Well, it's my pleasure, man. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Now, and you're still coming from Los Angeles, is that correct?
I am. Technically, I'm in Inglewood, but it's all LA.
Inglewood, yeah. I was for a long time right there in Fox Hills, so pretty close.
All right.
Yeah. So as I told you before, you know, I kind of high school grew up on KDAY and you and those other great DJs I had, and it really set my musical foundation for my whole life, with all that great R&B and funk. And I mean, it's in my blood, you know? And so, I mean, KDAY was the station for that at the time. So very glad to meet you and have you on.
Well, thank you very much. You made me feel good by telling me that. I'll have to tell some of the others. Most of us are still around. As a matter of fact, we had a little mini reunion about 6 months ago at the Roosevelt in Hollywood. It was just a few hours, but we got to spend time together with people that we had. Hold on a second, something's in my screen. With people that we hadn't seen. Spanky Lane came in. Um, our general manager Ed Kirby came in. Jim Maddox came in from New York. I mean, people would come. Guy Brody came in from Atlanta. Guy Stewart, you might have known him on KDAY as Guy Stewart. Anyhow, so yeah, so we, when we hear things like that, it's gratifying. We made an impact on somebody, made somebody feel good about something.
Well, we'll get into KDAY deeper in a little bit, but I just wanted to say at the outset, at the time I got into mobile disc jockey work myself, and it was such a big influence on me. And also, I would put together my own mixtapes, and most of it was stuff that I would hear on KDAY, and I would go out and get it as fast as possible and put it on my own boombox. So it was just a great time.
Well, all right.
Yeah. Hey, would you humor me with just once doing sort of like a quick call letter air check thing of KDAY?
Oh, you want me to say the calls like I used to say them?
Yeah.
All right. 1580 KDAY.
Hey, there it is.
That's yeah. The thing is the trick is to spin certain things, but not spin everything. You know what I mean? You want to spin the call letters, and you want to spin the whatever promotion you happen to be doing at the time. Otherwise, just talk like a human being. And I wrote about this in my book. I would never just say 1580 KDAY. Like when I was in San Francisco, I would never just say KFRC. I'd get a phone call if I did that. It had to be KFRC or KFRC but it had to be KFRC. It wasn't KFRC. So 1580 KDAY was not just 1580 KDAY. It was 1580 KDAY. But the rest of it, in the rest of the time, the trick is just to be who you are, and people will buy that because the honesty connects. So you don't want to sound like a jock when you're having a regular conversation. And here's how it paid off. I wrote about this. I was in Martoni's, which no longer exists, but Martoni's was the radio and records hangout of the day from '74 up until the earthquake. And I was sitting with my grandmother and her friend who were in town, and I wanted to give them a little bit of Hollywood. So I took them to lunch at Martoni's, and we're sitting in a booth and just chatting and winding up lunch. And a young lady came from an adjacent booth and said, "Excuse me, aren't you JJ Johnson from KGFJ?" I said, "No, actually, I'm on KDAY. But how did you know?" She said, "Well, I recognized your voice." Now, if I had come with some phony jock kind of a thing, if I had been talking like that on the air, she would not have recognized me in person. But I didn't do that. I gave her who I was on the air, and that's the trick, and that's where the magic is, because everybody has a personality. And when I say personality, I'm not talking about something that you go way out of your way to do, some kind of trick. We can have gimmicks, nothing wrong with a gimmick, but part of the magic is just being who you are, because everyone's unique. There's nobody like me. There's nobody like you. There's nobody. There's no two of us the same on the planet. So if you will just deliver that, people will buy it.
Wow. So the way you do those call letters is sort of like the logo in audio, it's like a branding. And then,
that's exactly what it is. It's a branding. Yeah. And the other thing is, if I don't make it sound special, why would anybody think of it as special? You know what I mean? So I have to make it sound special. I can't make it sound above anybody's head or better than. I just have to make it sound special, like I have some enthusiasm for this. I'm glad to be here. You know what I mean? And that has to come through every time you say the calls.
Yeah, makes sense. So JJ, I think you first got your start on radio in Cleveland, if I'm not mistaken, but could you tell us a little bit about how you came up, your youth, and how you first got into broadcasting?
Yeah, I was hanging out at a radio station, a jazz station. I was a stock boy at a women's shoe store in South Euclid, Ohio, which is the suburb of Cleveland. And I was given a chance to sell shoes. I was horrible. I don't think I ever sold anything. I was given a chance twice, but the first time I brought in my friend Chuck Benson from high school to work the stock detail while I tried to not sell shoes. And on the way back, we had to stop in Cleveland Heights, and there was a we were at the bus stop, and he said, you know, WCUY is right behind us. That was the local jazz station. I said, yeah, okay. He said, we ought to go up and see the disc jockey. I said, we can't do that. He said, yes, we can. No, we can. Yes, we can. No, we can't. Yes, we can. No, we can't. So and we ended up in the building, went upstairs, and we're in front of a door with a little round window, and you go in first. No, you go in. No, you go in. No, you go in. No, you go in. And the guy came to the door and said, may I help you? And we said, yeah, we're here to see the disc jockey. He said, you got him. And you come on in. So we came in, and he had us sit in the studio with him. And he told us, you know, he's working, so we can't be distractive. But we sat there, and I was initially fascinated with the idea that being on the far east end of Cleveland, in Cleveland Heights, in an eastern suburb, every time he opened his mouth, cracked the mic and said something or started a new song, somebody on the far west end, west side of town, would hear him instantly. And so here he is effectively traveling at the speed of sound. I was fascinated with that. And so I started coming up every week. I'd come up and hang out with him for an hour or two every Saturday evening. And finally, in 1966, I was still 15. His name was Chuck Lansing. I don't know what happened to Chuck, but his name was Chuck Lansing. And I mentioned him. I also mentioned him in the book. I did thank him once when I went on the air at WABQ. I thanked him for his help. But I'd sure like for him to know what he started, because good things really came out of that. At any rate, he said to me one night, he said, why don't you do this? I said, well, I can't. I'm only 15. He said, you got a Social Security card? I said, yeah. He said, well, then you can do this. And bing. So that's when the quest began. And we did an audition tape there for WCUY and its sister station, the other R&B station. There were two R&B stations in town. The WCUY sister station, WJMO, was one of them. And we had me stay till sign off, and then because they didn't have a production studio, so we did an audition tape right there in the WCUY air studio, and got rejected in two places. But I grew up in theater, so telling me no that's no big deal. It's that's what happens. It's showbiz. So I was wondering, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? And I was listening to the radio one day. This was in '66, just before summer vacation. And Mike Payne on WABQ, who we listen to every afternoon, Mike Payne said something to the effect of, if I can help you in any way, let me know. So I called him. I said, hey, I want to be on the radio. I want to be a disc jockey. He said, okay, well, come on down to see me. So I went down and I saw him. And, he gave me the big tour and everything. And, I was thrilled to death. And the station was nice. WABQ was nice. It was not elaborate, but it was nice, and it was state of the art. And then he drove me to a distant bus stop. So I, to one of my transfer locations, which I loved. And I'm riding with Mike Payne. This was big to me. So, and we became lifelong friends, by the way. So then a month passed, and he had my number, and I'm thinking, at the age of 15 and then 16, I turned 16 in July of that year. I'm thinking that I'm going to get a call because he got my number. And a month passed, or 2 months, and then 3 months passed. I'm thinking, wait a minute now. So I called him back. I said, hey, man, I'm serious. He said, okay, come on down. So I came down, and this time he showed me how the production studio worked. And it was slightly different from the air studio because that's where the old equipment was. It was fine equipment, but it was old. But he showed me how it worked, and he showed me how to make audition tapes. And he would hand me a stack of records and some, maybe a little commercial copy and some news, and say, okay, just go for it. Do what you think, right? He didn't give me any specific instructions. My first radio lesson after, at the end of his shift at 7 o'clock, he listened to what I put together. And the first lesson that I got in radio was, it's W, not W. Okay, I was saying WABQ. It's WABQ. And that was my first lesson from him. And I just kept doing that. And I did that and hung around the station for the next year and a half. And then finally, Leon Isaac Kennedy, he worked there. He was Leon Isaac on WABQ. He was on the way to WJLB in Detroit, which at that time was our sister station. It was all owned by John Booth. And nobody ever said, you're going to be the next guy, but I figured I'm the only one here. So 1968 came, and I knew that they're going to need somebody for the coming weekend, and I don't know how that's going to work because Leon's not here. And finally, Mike said to me very casually, he said, you ready to go on the air? And I said very casually, yeah. And I was I was doing cartwheels inside, but I was outwardly I was cool, but I was doing cartwheels inside. And that Saturday, January 6th, 1968, I went on the air. And that's how that happened. That's how it started.
Wow. And so by that time you were 17, or?
I was 17 when I was still in high school. I was still at JFK High School in Cleveland. And just for your information, I said, an hour and 45 minutes into my career, I said the S word twice on the air. And my life practically passed before my eyes because I thought, oh man, after all this, I can't believe I just did that. I didn't say anything. He didn't show up. He didn't call me. And I didn't say anything to him about it for 30 years. And finally I said, man, did you hear me say that? He said, nah. I said, okay, good. And I figured 30 years later, the coast was clear. I couldn't get retroactively fired. So yeah, anyhow, that was my adventure for the first day. I recount that all in the book, though.
What was the format?
It was a R&B station.
Yeah, boy, 68. I mean, that was a turbulent times too in our country.
Well, yeah. A few months later, I was on because I would in the longer. We were a daytimer, and when the days got long, we would be on longer. And it varied by what time of year it was, what month, the sign off times and the sign on times. And I had gone on. I think if memory serves, I was on the air after 7, and it wasn't on very long. I think we signed it off in like 8 or something like that at that time. I'm not certain. My memory may be a little faulty here. All I know is that Wild West Dickinson was at the station with me. And we were puttering around, and he looked at the teletype, and Dr. King had been assassinated. And so we contacted Mike Payne. He was the program director by that time. And John Jay, who was the general manager. And John Jay said, fire it back up. We'll deal with the commission tomorrow. We were a daytimer, but we went 24 hours for 3 days. And all I did was, in those 3 days, was go on the air, go to school, and sleep. That's all I did. And we fielded about over 70,000 phone calls, and Cleveland did not burn. So I think we did a pretty good job of that.
Hmm.
And that's when it really becomes important. I was also on the air in LA when they call it the Rodney King riots. I call it the Daryl Gates riots, but that's a whole political conversation. But that's when it becomes important because we did have influence, and you need to talk people down. That doesn't mean that you need to go into agreement with whatever occurred, and we never did. But looting and burning is not is not the answer. Getting angry about it is absolutely understandable, but you know, we need to calm down here. And Cleveland didn't burn at all. I mean, it had problems, and it had a riot later that year, but it didn't. There was no response, such response to the MLK assassination.
JJ, a few things. One is I have to say that shoe store. I worked for a shoe store when I was late teens. One day. That was my shortest job ever. I think it was at a Kenny Shoes. I did it one day, and I was like, I'm not coming back.
So were you a master salesman like I was? I was the worst salesman in the history of the universe.
Yeah, well,
worst shoe salesman.
I knew it wasn't for me, but
okay.
And then Cleveland. I wanted to just ask you, you know, about that environment, that community, because music seems to run so deep in Ohio. I mean, you have Cleveland with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the great artists that have come from there, but also Cincinnati and Dayton with all the funk stuff. What is it about Ohio?
I don't know. I can tell you that Cleveland is an entertainment town. A lot of people don't know that. They knew it was a steel town, and it certainly was an industrial city. But Cleveland, for example, I started off in theater when I was a child, when I was 5 years old. Cleveland has the second largest theatrical community in America behind New York. Most people don't know that. The entertainment scene has always been vibrant. I don't know how it is today, but I was raised by a musician. My father was a musician, professional musician. And so, you know, we had people come out of there like, you know, from Dorothy Danders to Halle Berry, Screaming Jay Hawkins, the OJs, and so on and so forth. It was part of the environment. It was something that, it was the norm. I mean, I could go to Leo's Casino on Sunday afternoon, see the Temptations, catch a bus, go down to the Music Box, see the OJs when there were 5 of them, and then go around the corner to a place called Club 105. There was no known act there, but there was, you know, dancing and music and whatnot. This was on Sunday. This is from Sunday afternoon into the nighttime. Then I have to split, you know, go home and get ready for school the next day. But I could do all that for $10. And even at that time, that was no money. Wow. So that was I don't have another point of reference. So I don't know, you know, how to completely how to answer that question, because I grew up with that, and that was what I knew. That was the norm.
I certainly never knew that about Cleveland. I mean, growing up in Los Angeles, very similar, you know, with the film industry and the music industry. So in my blood, and I was used to that.
Right.
But I didn't know that about Cleveland.
Right. Well, a lot of the black actors, but not strictly black actors. A lot of the black actors you see came through Caramo House. Ron O'Neal came through Caramo, Robert Guillaume, and many others. I met Lorraine Hansberry there because ours was the only non-professional company licensed to present a Raisin in the Sun in 1961. So that's how heavy it was. That's what a heavy duty entertainment environment we had going on there.
Wow. And of course, I have the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton also, which I was able to go to a few years ago. That was a thrill for me, but there's a lot happening in Ohio, apparently.
Yeah. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you know, the term was not, the term rock and roll was not invented by Alan Freed, but he applied it to that music, because rock and roll meant sex. That was the meaning of the word, you know, doing the wild thing, right? I'm gonna rock and roll with so-and-so. And so he played it, and he was playing it in 1952, and aiming it to, it wasn't just limited to, but he was aiming it to local white kids, which drove the parents crazy, and calling it rock and roll music, which implied sex, which made them crazier, which of course made it very popular with them. And that's how it came to be, because the music had already existed. but he dubbed it rock and roll, and it stuck. So it's appropriate that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame should be in Cleveland.
So, JJ, how did your career progress from there? If you could step me through, what transpired up until you made the trip to Los Angeles.
Oh, okay. So I got a call from Mike Payne one day. He had moved on. He was getting ready to go to KCOH in Houston. And 2 days later, I got a call from Wild West, who had also moved on. And he was getting ready to go to he was at KYOK in Houston. And one offered $115, or $110 a week. Now we're talking 1969. One offered $110 a week, the other $125. Well, that did it. I went to KYOK for $125, and I stayed there for about a year and a half. And in the course of things, I decided I wanted to work in top 40 radio, so I called Bill Young up at KILT and KILT, and I went to see him. Well, he didn't have anything for me, but he got on the phone right in front of me and contacted Paul Drew. Paul Drew had been the program director of CKLW, which boomed out of Windsor. I mean, they gave Cleveland weather. They were so effective in Cleveland. And Bill Drake was the consultant. And Paul Drew at that point was at KFRC in San Francisco. And Bill Young said, well, which way would you like to go? Would you like to go north, east, or west? I said, well, I can stay here and wait for an opening at KILT. I said, or I'd like to go west. So he called Paul Drew right there in front of me. He said, I got this kid here. And I'm going to send you his tape and resume and whatnot. And he put me in touch with Drew. So I was in touch with Drew. Then I fell out with KYOK and and ended up in Chicago. I when I went home, I called Jack the rapper and I said, hey, Jack, I said, I just quit KYOK. I said, I need a gig. He said, call me back in 3 minutes. So I called him back in 3 minutes. He said, okay, here's a number. He gave me a 312 number. He said, call Eddie Morrison at WGRT in Chicago. Let me know what happens. So I called Eddie. He said he had an opening and send him a tape. I sent him a tape right away. He called me back and said, hey, let me fly you up here so you can look at the place and see what you think. So I flew up to Chicago, loved it. It was very much like Cleveland. And took that gig. So I was at WGRT in Chicago. This was in 1971, early 71. Now, what happened in the meantime was Paul Drew called me and said, hey, you stop sending tapes, keep sending tapes. So I started sending him tapes again. Then he called me one day and said, I'm at the Sheraton O'Hare. Would you like to join me for dinner? Well, yeah, I'd like to join Paul Drew for dinner. So I went out to the Sheraton O'Hare and had dinner with Paul. And he said, I'm going to have an opening in a couple of months. He said, and here's what it's going to pay. It was really good pay for that time. And more than I was making in Chicago. And then the offer came. I couldn't resist. I mean, you really should be at a station for a year. Anyhow, and I wasn't. I didn't feel good about that. But the people were really nice. And the funny thing was, I got an offer to host Soul Train while I was there. It was a local TV show, and I couldn't do it because Mr. Atlas, who owned the station, was a little put out with me for leaving so soon. So he invoked the no compete. I think there was a no compete clause, which would have included that, as it was worded. But that's all right. I wasn't mad at him. I've totally understood that. And I headed to San Francisco. This was in June of 71. And I went to KFRC, man. KFRC was unbelievable. This was, and I'm with the same team that gave us CKLW, which I thought was just magic. This, was an unbelievable operation. And I was at KFRC for 3.5 years. I ended up being the program director of their automated FM, which was not the most fun I ever had in my life, but it was a good experience in that it taught me how to do, it gave me skills that I was able to use later, but I never liked that gig. But I loved being on KFRC, man, and it was prestigious. I mean, being on KFRC said to the radio world that you're one of the best, and it was the king of the Bay Area. It was top of Bay Area radio for contemporary music, and It
How
was,
how
I
big
mean,
was
to
this?
this day, those of us who were there, it's like, can you believe we were there? Was
How,
that
how,
incredible or what?
how big was their signal? How many watts were they putting on?
It was a 5,000 watt, but it covered the Bay Area like a blanket. Remember, San Francisco is surrounded by water on three sides. You have the Pacific Ocean, the Golden Gate, and San Francisco Bay. And the transmitter was in Berkeley, actually, across the bay, and the coverage was incredible. I was listening. I tuned into KFRC when as I was driving through Sacramento. First person I heard was Bob Foster, and that was that was in the daytime, and then at dusk, I got my first view of the bay, and I could barely make out the lights of the city across the bay, and then drove through past Emeryville and Berkeley and Oakland, and got on the Bay Bridge, and then came through that tunnel. It was like the movies. Came through that tunnel. There's trying to remember the name of the island right in the middle of the bay. All of a sudden, I'm blanking on it, but there's an island that the freeway goes through. And when it came out, it was like a movie. It was like one of those Humphrey Bogart, Sam Spade movies. Came out through this thing, and the city comes into view. It's like a movie. I couldn't believe it. And it was that way, really, for me, for all the time that I was there. I never thought I'd ever leave San Francisco while I was there, because for me, it was just the perfect city. But then I did. What happened was I got an offer from KDAY. Jim Maddox called me up and said, "Hey, would you come to KDAY?" I turned him down twice on the phone. Then I came here. Actually, I came to Inglewood to visit a friend, and for the weekend. And naturally, I tuned in KDAY, and I was real impressed. I said, "Oh man, this is a radio station here." So I thought about it. I was not happy with my KFRC position. I don't think I was exceptionally good at it. I think I was okay. And Drew would fire anybody, even any people he liked, and Drew always liked me. But that would not keep you in a job with him. And finally, I said, "You know what? I'm leaving. I'm gonna take Jim Maddox up on his offer." So I called him and I said, "Listen," I said, "I don't know, if the offer still stands." I said, "But I'm quitting this job tomorrow. So, if you're still interested, I'm interested." He said, "Well, call me back tomorrow." I called him back the next day, and he said, "Okay, come on down." And that was that. So I came down, and that lasted 17 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to get used to earthquakes?
Oh, it was not a problem. You grow up in severe weather. An earthquake is just another natural phenomenon. The worst one was the last one, the one we had here in what was that, 94? Was that 94? Rodney King was 92, right?
Yeah.
So the earthquake was 94, and that was an experience, but it still didn't scare me. I mean, that's what happens. I live in LA. The place is going to shake every now and then.
Yeah.
I'm not going to worry about it.
You're a cool customer.
You had most of the fatalities that happened in that quake all happened in one building. Most of them.
I know. Actually, I was going to. Do you know where Cal State Northridge is?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I was going there when. Well, actually, no. I had graduated from there. I was working in Chatsworth when that one hit, and the place where I was working was just devastated. But yeah, no, I grew up in that, so I'm used to it. But my wife, who was from New York, she came out there, and it definitely took. I don't think she ever got used to it.
Well, I can understand why that would, but look, you're talking to somebody who shoveled tons of snow, who walked to school in snow, and when it was high school, if I didn't want to wait for the bus, I just walked the 2 miles back home through the snow. And I mean that we had snow because Cleveland sits right there on Lake Erie, so it gets real snowy. So there was that. And there were thunderstorms, which bothers some people. I love thunderstorms, and I kind of miss them because we don't get them here. But when I was a child, I would put on my raincoat and go out on the porch so I get the full effect of the thunderstorm, because I love that stuff. So earthquakes, you know, they happen.
Yeah.
And stuff goes bad, and something's going to fall off your wall, and something's going to fall, come flying out of your cabinets, and things are going to break, and then you pick it all up and clean it all up and buy new stuff, and go on.
The thunderstorms, since I moved to the Charlotte area, definitely get thunderstorms here, unlike what you see in Los Angeles. So
right,
yeah.
Right. They're wimpy here. In Cleveland, they were some real boomers.
Yeah. So JJ, talk to me about when you first settled in at KDAY. What was the audience like? What was the format like? Talk about that.
Jim Maddox was the program director. All the jocks were top 40 jocks except for Tom Reed. All the jocks that come from top 40 stations: Don Mack, Steve Woods, Jim, me, and I broke in on the all-night shift with Gene West, which is also what happened at KFRC. I broke in on the all-night shift with Gene West, so I broke in 2 places with him, and he was at KFRC. But they were all top 40 jocks, and what we were really doing was black music in a top 40 style. We never called it soul radio, but because we didn't want to be exclusionary. But without a doubt, if you listen to the music, you listen to the news, and you listen to the public service announcements and so forth, you would know where it was targeted, and it was targeted to LA's black community. And the acceptance level by the time I arrived, because remember, it had been going for about 6 months by the time I got there in June of '74. It started in January of '74, and it was immensely successful. So I just walked into a success, and it was like instant popularity just because I was there. I didn't really do anything to earn that per se. I think I earned my stay, but I didn't earn my way up. Because just being on KDAY would make you popular. So I was popular, and that happened fast. That happened in a matter of weeks. After they get to know your name, bam, that's it. So and the jocks, Steve Woods turned me on to certain things. He's the one first took me to Martoni's. I went to the whiskey. I had been to the whiskey once before on a visit, but I went to the whiskey and saw Rufus and Shaka Khan the second night in town. And that's when I fell in love with her. I mean, she to this day, she's my favorite female vocalist. And that was established. Yeah, that was established in June of '74 when I saw her perform with Rufus. And I turned to my friend Billy and said, "Man, the band is really good, but the girl is awesome. Wow." So yeah, that's how that went. I was welcomed, and it was pleasant. KDAY was a pleasant experience, period. I mean, if I took all my good times and all my bad times at KDAY and I put them in respective piles, I had 14 good years. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And I think that's pretty good, man. I was there for 17 years. Yeah, I had some episodes, but like everybody does everywhere. But it was overall, it was a magic kind of thing. And I think most of us who were there are grateful to have been there,
Yeah, I saw Shaka and Rufus at the Roxy in '77. That was fantastic. The Roxy during that period also had most of the great black acts came through the Roxy. So many great shows there in the mid to late '70s.
Oh yeah, I saw Bob Marley there, for example, in '76, and I introduced Evelyn King there one night. I forgot what year that was, but I introduced her, and then I went and sat down and watched the show with Peter Allen and Clive Davis. And I wasn't like buddies with them, but that's where I sat and we chatted. And I saw a lot of great acts at the Roxy, man. The Roxy was happening. But we also had the Starwood in the hood in Leimert Park. We had the Total Experience.
Oh yeah.
We had the Universal Amphitheater before they put the roof on it. I was there. I was at the very last performance. I remember the last song that was performed at the Universal Amphitheater was Street Life by the Crusaders. Oh, yeah. And they did it with a full orchestra, and it was banging. I mean, I've even told them, way back when, I said, man, the studio version is great, but it's anemic compared to Oops, I'm sorry. All right, there we go. I'm sorry. The studio version was anemic compared to the live performance that I saw at the amphitheater. I'm sorry, excuse all this motion. Let me get that straight. Yeah, that particular performance of Street Life was unbelievable, man. You had to be there. It's hard to describe. You know how you see magic performances,
Oh yeah,
and they're they defy description.
yeah,
That's still good grief, man. This thing keeps sliding. I'm sorry. Okay,
yeah,
I think that'll hold it.
yeah. No, I mean that was just an amazing period. But I mean, I was there for so many shows, including George Benson's Weekend in L.A. at the Roxy, and just so many of those were just magic.
That was a great venue. Great venue.
Um, so you came there at a time when not only was the station thriving, but it was such a golden era for Black music. I mean, so you had just all the great artists, whether they were your Denise Williams and your Emotions, and on sort of the R&B side, but also on the funk side, just so many great acts from Ohio Players to Earth, Wind and Fire to the Commodores.
Oh, listen, when back in the day, man, it was not unusual. It was not all unusual for me to arrive at work and run into George Clinton in the hallway. That was just another day at work. You go downstairs and there's Patti LaBelle by the coffee machine. I mean, it was normal. It didn't happen every day, but it happened so often you weren't surprised. It was that was life, and that was the Hollywood life, and that's what we lived, man. It was the magic kind of a thing. It's as my friends in Cleveland would ask me, what's it like being in Hollywood? I say, being in Hollywood is fine as long as you don't take it seriously. In other words, it's okay to play Hollywood as long as you know you're playing Hollywood. Don't get serious about it, but it sure is fun to play, and it's a good place to be. It's a wonderful place to be. I mean, I recall being on Sunset and hearing a car honking his horn, honk, honk, JJ, honk, 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 JJ. I turned up, it's Marvin Gaye. And I remember thinking to myself, after he pulled in his driveway, we was in front of his studio, and he pulled in his driveway, and I stood there and chatted with him for a bit. And then after that, I'm walking down Sunset, and I'm thinking, I'm on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, and I was just stopped by Marvin Gaye and had a conversation with Marvin Gaye. Wow, what a life! I mean, even when you're living that life, it's unbelievable. I mean, the friendships that I've made and the people that I've had the privilege to know. Most of them have been acquaintances. Some became friends. Barry White was a friend, and me and Marvin we were approaching. We were very friendly, and there's a whole story behind that, which also is in the book. Because that started off a little shaky, but we were good. Like within a minute of meeting each other, we were cool. And but there were so many others who were I always loved entertainers. I mean, I grew up around entertainers, and then I ended up in Hollywood with bunches of them. So
yeah, you're destined to be.
Yeah, so it was a cool thing. It's like a dream, really, really was.
Well, was there any sort of like shenanigans that went in the studio? Did any of those guys bring in any drugs, or I mean, did like stuff go on back there?
Oh yeah, there was that going on. It's something I wouldn't put that on anybody or blame anybody for my actions. But yeah, not all. Most of us were getting loaded, and that was not unusual. Wish I had that money back. Wish I had not done that stupidity, because it's pretty stupid. I tell people to this day, do not smoke a joint. It's not good for you. I don't care if you think it's benign. It is not benign. It does you harm, and they don't want to see that. So, and I tell them I've been on both sides of that fence. But trust me, I smoke more grass than you probably ever seen. But and I don't say that with pride. I say that as a warning. Don't do that. But people are going to do what they're going to do. I don't think they should go to jail for it, but I don't think they should do it. And I don't do any drugs. I have a glass of wine, beer from time to time.
Yeah, but back then, I mean, it was just part of, came with the turf, really.
You know what's funny though? It's like it was part of it, and then over like an 8-month period, it just disappeared from the scene. It went from being hip to have something on you, or somebody would invite you to come partake. That went from being hip to and then at a point 8 months later, it was not hip at all, and you just didn't do that. It was, and it wasn't as if it was like it seemed like a spontaneous action by a bunch of people. We all came to the same agreement without ever discussing it.
Kind of like the death of disco. It just
that could have had to do with it, but I'm telling you, it was amazing how that happened, because it wasn't like something we discussed. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't like, oh, you shouldn't do that. It was just we went from doing it to not doing it. I quit. I said, no, that's it, man. I'm done. I can't do this. This is crazy. It's not good for your health. It's not good for your mental state. You're supposed to take care of business. No, I don't think so. So good riddance, and most people grew out of that. But at the same time, that was what was so amazing to me, because it happened in like a 8 or 9 month period.